Decades have passed, but the rage of the virus outbreak has receded from memory for many. And here comes 28 years later, by Danny Boyle and Alex Garland reuniting to push the 28 franchise into new territory. Now, this is not just another zombie romp, it's a coming of age story, a meditation on mortality, grief, and legacy, now set 28 years after the last outbreak. It's ambitious, haunted, and sometimes uneven, but when it works, it strikes deep. The world has changed. Europe is purged of rage, but Britain remains quarantined, islanded, guarded. A small community survives on the island of Lindisfarne, protected by tides and traditions. Among them are Jamie, a scavenger father played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, Isla, his ill wife by Jodie Comer, and his son Spike, played by Alfie Williams. Now, Isla's condition pushes Jamie and Spike to make a dangerous journey to the mainland, a rite of passage, a desperate search for meaning, and perhaps even a cure. Meanwhile, remnants of infection, mutated, infected, and human cults evolve in unpredictable ways. From the start, Spike is our emotional lodestar, a 12-year-old born in horror. He knows nothing else but survival, story, hunger, and loss. As Spike's journey deepens, he moves from passive witness to actor, demanding agency in a world that's already written him off. Jamie's arc is tragic, a man torn between duty, guilt, fear, and the weight of carrying a spouse he might lose. Isla, at times silent, at times lucid, represents both the anchor and catalyst. Her illness is literal and symbolic, pushing our characters towards reckoning. The key scenes anchor the film's emotional core. The early overture sees Spike and Jamie hunting infected on the causeway, which has tension, danger, the tide of closing in. The gas station sequence is unforgettable. Isla and Spike trapped, gas swirling, threat looming, the junction of horror and personal terror. Another standout is when Spike defends Dr. Kilson's sanctuary, facing an alpha infected in brutal confrontation. Now, there's also a bone monument where skulls are woven into memorial, and the quiet, terrible moment is when Isla must accept her fate. The finale unfolds in melodic anguish. For example, Spike leaving the new child behind, returning to the mainland, as Jamie Crystal's cult looms, setting the stage for the trilogy continuation. Thematically, 28 years later is about death, memory, and legacy, and the cost of survival. Unlike earlier films where rage is external, now death is internal. The film forces us to confront the aftermath, not just the outbreak. What does it mean to survive when everything you love decays? The conceit of memento mori, remember you must die, is actually woven throughout. Dr. Kilson's skull monument, Isla's suffering, the naming of the child after Isla. Now, these are the emotional bedrocks. The narrative also hints a societal background, isolationism, surveillance, cultism, and how fear can warp human communities. Critics note echoes of Brexit and pandemic anxiety embedded in this story. Cinematography is striking. Anthony Mantle returns, now working in a 2.76:1 ultra-wide ratio, which is a bold decision that forces your eye to roam, to scan, to never settle. Interestingly, the film also uses mixed formats like iPhones, drones, action cams. Is a homage to the original Gorilla spirit. The effect is sometimes jarring but often visceral. Boyle and editor John Harris spies the stock footage, black and white frames, frenetic cuts, and slow motion ruptures to keep you off balance. Now, these moves heightens the dread but occasionally undercut narrative coherence actually. Now, the sound and design amplify the tension. The infected still sprint, snarling, but now there are variations, mutated forms, alpha infected, grotesque imagery, and so on. Now, the score and ambient soundscapes actually complement both the horror and homage. Cinematic design often lingers in ruins. For example, the bridges, the flooded causeways, crumbling facades. They are actually a visual reminder that the world decays as perhaps the soul does too. However, the film is not without cracks. tonal shifts actually erupt. The third act pivots into cult spectacles and mythology. For example, Jimmy Crystal's group, visual excesses, power fantasy. Now, all that feel like a tonal leap rather than natural evolutions. Some critics call the storytelling quite incoherent, accusing it of abandoning internal logic to chase punchy moments. Others actually argue that the certain character motivations are actually very weak or underexposed, or that the film actually really wastes time setting up future entries rather than centering its own heart, which I think is very important. Now, box office wise, 28 years later is now the most successful entry in the franchise. It has so far crossed 100 million globally, with domestic and international earnings combining to a roughly about 103 million against a reported budget of 60 million. Now, it has had the highest opening weekend of the trilogy, signaling that the franchise still has a pull. Now, let me add another note on the ending. Now, it's all really polarizing. Many praise the film through its final stretch until the last few minutes pivot into cult mythos and surreal imagery, which Jimmy Crystal inverted crosses extended twist. Now, some feel these beat derail the emotional resonance built before, while others see them as a bold spiral towards the next chapter, which is baffling ending in a recurring critic. Now, in conclusion, I would say 28 years later is both a tribute and reinvention. It doesn't replicate the raw terror of 28 days later, and it isn't an action film or forwarded as 28 weeks later. Instead, it leans emotional, elegiac, and experimental. In fact, it asks us to live in the aftermath, to grieve, to question what survival actually costs. When it works, it's in Spike's eyes in Isla's goodbye, and in the clash of infected against hope, it actually resonates. Its flaws are visible, for example, tonal imbalances, narrative leaps, underdeveloped threads, but ambitions is what actually matters. The film holds both the grief and rage in trembling balance. For a franchise born in virus hysteria and kinetic horror, now this entry dares to mourn. Now this movie is a must watch.